It's bizarre and hard to prove. Yet details that were told to us in interviews conducted across the country were later verified by authorities, who say there are consistent telltale clues.
Is cannibalism part of the ritual?
The children have spoken about this in almost every instance. Also, human feces, or drinking the urine, or drinking human blood.
He would take the bodies and put a trash bag over the feet and head. He'd put it, and then what he would do is he had his car parked out back. So they took them to the funeral home, and they were cremated, and nobody ever knew anything about the body.
What'd you say to the little children that were out there?
Pray and scream.
That we're in a time where we have to open up to these a lot darker aspects of the human psyche. We have to admit that these things go on, and we have to provide ways for both sides of the equation to heal.
Do you think you're the devil himself?
No, but I do have a good mirror.
Investigating a crime at a cemetery.
Yes, Satan is alive.
Suggesting that this crime is tied to some form of ritualistic activity.
The crime of the devil.
Digging up graves and stealing remains for rituals.
In the late 1980s, the small Ontario town of Prescott, or Molescott, as it was known to some that lived in that area at the time, harbored a secret so dark it would unravel one of Canada's largest child sexual abuse investigation that would become known as Project Jericho. It began with 3 young siblings in foster care, whispering stories too horrific to imagine. Sexual violations by family members. They played monster games involving masks and costumes. They forced children to eat awful things. Confinement with chains and under floors, weapons brandished to install terror, and even an infant who was allegedly murdered named Joshua. What started as a single family's nightmare exploded into a multi-generational network of predators abusing their own children, neighbors, kids, and even grandchildren. Hundreds of victims emerged, some estimates near 300 in a town of just thousands. And over 100 offenders, many themselves former child victims trapped in the cycle. Elements of ritualistic abuse designed to break the spirit and ensure silence. The same kind of ritual abuse that has been found all over social media lately because of the Epstein files. Only unlike Epstein, this case is rarely discussed and I feel very well hidden because people find the idea of ritual abuse just too disturbing and almost too dark to believe. But your girl Holly is going to jump right into that rabbit hole anyway, even knowing I most likely will be demonetized on this video. And I'm sorry my chicken is laying an egg in the background. If you can hear that, I apologize. Your girl Holly also lives on a farm, and those things happen. I live in Oklahoma. I'm an Okie girl. So if you're from Oklahoma listening, give me a shout out. Texas, not so much. I'm just joking, you Texans. We love y'all too. Mostly. Well, anyway, hello. Welcome to the Murder She Said. If you'd like to find this gal again, country gal again, this big YouTube world, then make sure to smash the subscribe button because a nerdy country true crime gal like me sometimes gets lost in this big YouTube world. So, hit it. And we're going to start the story. Prescott, Ontario, in the late 1980s and early 1990s was a fading border town of roughly 4,200 souls. Many families living in the community were uneducated and poor and barely scraped by on welfare. The locals sometimes referred to these families as the inbred hillbillies. So when the scandal broke out, not many in the community were surprised. One local man said that when you see a grown man walking down the main street holding hands with his 17-year-old daughter, well, you know something just doesn't feel quite right. People noticed, but in a small town where everyone knows everyone's business, no one wanted to be the one to stir the pot, or so to speak. A persuasive culture of silence that allowed the network to persist unchecked until 3 young siblings in foster care finally spoke up. Their disclosures cracking open what had long been an open secret to some and an unimaginable horror to others. The siblings' stories begin with their mother, Norma, who was mentally challenged and had also been an incest abuse survivor. She was only 17 years old when she gave birth to her oldest child, Kelly. She met and took off with the first man she could find just to get away from her abusive, alcoholic father. As soon as she gave birth to Kelly, she realized that caring for a baby was very hard work and more effort than she was willing to put in. Her new boyfriend went to jail after Kelly was born, and she began living with her abusive parents again. Norma came from a long line of generational abuse. Cousins, aunts, uncles, her whole extended family were all sexually and physically abusive. Ritual abuse was also used in this family. Ritual abuse usually involves repeated abuse over an extended period of time. Physical abuse is severe, sometimes including torture and killing. Ritual abuse is usually painful, sadistic, and humiliating, intended as a means of gaining dominance over the victim. It includes mind control techniques, which involve rituals or ceremonies that are used to control these victims. Children's services were soon called by neighbors who saw the baby was filthy and cried all the time. Norma was made to take parenting classes while Kelly continued living in Norma's parents' home. After her boyfriend Robert got out of jail, Norma and Kelly moved back in with him, and then she became pregnant again, like she needed to be pregnant again. Robert was soon jailed again for 30 days for stealing a barbecue grill in Ottawa. If you're going to get in jail for something, why a barbecue grill? Just make a campfire and grill that way. Like, it's not nothing I'd have a desire to steal, but okay, he did. When he returned again, he was just fed up with Norma's laziness and nagging. Told her to shut up, punched her in the jaw, hit her in the stomach, and sent her flying across the room in her 9th month of pregnancy. She refused to press charges. In the spring, she gave birth to a boy she called Ronnie. Baby Ronnie was easier to care for than Kelly because he slept most of the time. Poor baby's probably unconscious, getting hit like that. 1 year later, another baby was born. They called him Timmy. Timmy was born prematurely because Robert had kicked her in the stomach. Seems to make a habit of that. Soon after Timmy was born, Robert went back to jail, and unknown to Robert, Norma was already pregnant again. Norma was determined that Children's Services didn't find out about this baby, however, because they'd just be on her tail again. They kept bothering her, and she didn't like that. When Robert was in jail, she started a flirtation with another man named William Elliot, but everyone called him Billy. When he asked her out, she left the children in a subsidized apartment, alone, and locked the door. Billy Elliot was a local man who also came from a long line of abuse. Billy brought Norma and her children to his old family-owned farmhouse to live. Spooky looking place. This is the place became a home of nightmares for the kids. The farmhouse had been vacant for years because it had twice been ravaged by fire. It was in terrible shape and likely should have been condemned. But it was on a quiet country road in the middle of nowhere with almost no traffic and a quiet place for Billy to do whatever he wanted. Across the road was a cemetery with a big gate. Billy worked part-time at a local feed store, but he also was the caretaker for the graveyard across the road from this old farmhouse. If you can call him a caretaker, because he had a bizarre hobby of digging up the dead from the graveyard, and he would sometimes stash their skulls or their bodies inside this old farmhouse. Strange guy. Norma's family, of course, proved to Billy, because they're weird too. He was as strange as they were. Norma had her 4th child, Joshua, inside this old farmhouse. She never took the baby boy or herself to the hospital, nor never told the Children's Services about this new baby. No one other than her family, Billy, and a family-designated doctor knew this baby existed. After moving to this farmhouse, it's time for the oldest child, Kelly, to start school. Norma rarely bothered getting Kelly to school on time, if she even got her there at all. Most days, Kelly simply didn't show up, or she'd arrive hours late, just a mess and confused. When she did make it in, the pickup was just as unreliable. More than once, the teacher waited with her long after dismissal of the school day, only for Norma to never appear. The teacher was beside herself. Kelly's hair was often unwashed, tangled, her clothes ill-fitting, and far too light for the season. Like in the dead of winter, this 5-year-old little girl would show up in thin sneakers, no socks, a summer t-shirt, and a threadbare hoodie. Rain or shine, it didn't matter. She'd stand shivering at the classroom door while the teacher hurriedly dug through the lost and found bin or borrowed spare gear from other students just to get her outside for recess without risking frostbite. Kelly had also been stealing food from other children and eating straight out of the trash can at school. One day in 1988, Kelly was left waiting after school again for her mother or a taxi. When neither arrived, school officials had had enough. They demanded urgent action. The social workers agreed it was time for Kelly to be placed into immediate foster care. Norma didn't even fight. She was glad to get rid of her until at least the end of the school year. Ronnie and Timmy, and of course Joshua, the child that no one knew about, was still living with Norma and Billy, however. As soon as summer came, the court granted weekend visits for Kelly back at home. Go back to that nasty home. After Kelly was returned, a social worker was assigned to make visits to the old farmhouse. I don't understand how the children weren't taken away immediately after entering the home. I suppose during these visits they would hide Joshua because he was never seen. But the home was filthy, with garbage littering the floor. The walls were stained with black smoke from the previous fires. Dirty diapers were thrown in the closets, and the walls were smeared with feces. The children slept on bare, ripped mattresses, stained with urine and filled with fleas. In the living room was a filthy couch and broken chairs. But when the social worker entered the basement, she was completely surprised because it appeared much neater than the rest of the home. In the basement sat a decent-looking couch, and overall appeared cleaner than the rest of the home. While upstairs the children had been only sleeping on mattresses on the floor, downstairs in the basement there was a complete bed. There was also some expensive equipment down there too. 2 TVs, 2 VCRs, and a new stereo. That would be fishy to me. Social worker spent hours teaching Norma how to clean her house, wash dishes, give children baths, and all the basics. But when she returned again a few days later, the children in the house were filthy again. Despite the social worker's persistent visits, repeated cleanup attempts, and provision of supplies, the children's living condition remained dire. In the boys' bedroom, urine-soaked and grimy mattress lay bare on the floor with almost no sheets or blankets to cover these poor little boys. The shared bathroom was in a revolting shape, thick with stains, grime caked everywhere, and a horrible odor that lingered no matter how much scrubbing was done. The kids' room had no window screens at all, allowing swarms of flies to buzz freely through the house day and night. While Norma's own bedroom, of course, she had screens in there. Broken chairs and tables cluttered the space, and food waste like moldy hot dogs rotted openly on the floors. One entire closet was crammed floor to ceiling with bags and stacks of soiled, used diapers that had never been disposed of. Even after the social worker spent hours combing through the children's hair with medicated shampoo, manually removing nits and treating their scabs, the lice infestation kept returning almost immediately. The children's hair remained matted and crawling, a constant source of itching and discomfort that no amount of intervention seemed able to fully resolve. The social worker gave Norma 7 days before she returned to the farmhouse. The morning the social worker arrived, Billy was working at the feed store. While the social worker was talking to Norma, the oldest child, Kelly, walked downstairs in a thin little nightie and asked her mother, "Do I have to sleep with Billy again tonight?" Norma's face tightened. "Hush that nonsense right now," she snapped. "Go on, get out of here." "But Billy said I have to," Kelly whispered, before slipping back upstairs. Once Kelly walked upstairs, the social worker turned to Norma. "What was that about?" she asked. Norma gave a short, dismissive laugh. "She's just being dramatic, making up stories like kids do. Because on the really hot nights, Billy and I drag the mattresses down to the basement. It stays cooler down there. We all pile in it together so nobody's sweating through the night. That's all it is." Social worker noted it, but said nothing more at the time. A few weeks later, during a follow-up visit, she saw Kelly sitting on the edge of the couch. And Kelly was rubbing at her private area through her shorts. When asked what was wrong, Kelly mumbled, "It's sore and it's itchy, and it hurts when I go to the bathroom sometimes." Social worker's stomach dropped. She immediately told Norma, "I'm going to set up an appointment with a pediatric specialist right away to get this checked out properly." Norma's whole demeanor shifted in an instant. She seemed very agitated. Norma had been told many times by her parents, Elmer and Donna, that her family was only supposed to go to this certain family doctor they had. So Norma told the worker that Kelly should be taken to this family doctor, Dr. John Finley. Dr. John Finley flatly refused to examine Kelly. He said it's probably just a yeast infection. So the social worker then immediately took her to another doctor who told her that Kelly appeared to have been sick. abused. Later, the boys were also examined by a medical expert, and they were also determined to have been abused. All 3 children were apprehended and placed in foster care. The youngest, Joshua, was no longer in the home. And the horrors that would come out about what had happened to Joshua and to the other children in this household would be a nightmare that would be exposed by these 3 brave young children who were taken from that home. Kelly was 6, Ronnie was 4, and Timmy was 3 years old when they were taken away from that home of horror for good. All the children were incredibly hyperactive. Ronnie and Timmy could barely speak. They had been severely neglected by their mother, who only had called them ignorant brats and animals. And so they'd never learned to talk. They had been like feral children, basically. So after being placed in 2 prior foster homes that said, though, they're too difficult to deal with, they were just too hard for the families, they were then put with foster parents Francis and Dan, who already had 3 children of their own. The children had night terrors and were unable to sleep through the night. They would eat out of the trash cans after eating everything out of the cabinets. Timmy would often use the bathroom on himself, and so would Ronnie. The children would also touch adults in inappropriate ways. Ronnie and Timmy would scream for no reason and didn't seem to know how to communicate in any other way. The new foster parents were patient with the children, and once the children started effectively communicating, Francis and Dan began to hear tales that they had a hard time even believing. How else, though, could these children describe down to the details the abuse that had been done to them unless it had truly occurred? No child could make these kind of allegations up, especially children who had never been allowed to watch regular TV. I'm going to put a warning right here because it does get pretty graphic. The children would describe monsters, fairy tale characters, and Disney characters such as Snow White doing horrible things to them. Snow White immediately reminded me of the Epstein files, with that picture of the girl dressed as Snow White. That my last video was about Disney. What is up with these stories about Disney and predators? So when the children began to watch movies with their new foster family, it really upset them. They asked to never see scary movies. Ronnie told Francis, "I especially don't want to watch Snow White." He said Snow White was really scary and people got cut up and all their skin comes off. It was just the beginning of the horror that Francis and Dan would hear. One night when Francis was reading the children a book, Ronnie began to tell Francis about how they were forced to watch and produce movies in their basement. Their little cousins were forced to watch and make the movies too, and other children as well. In the movies were monsters and little children who were being hurt by these monsters. And sometimes these children would be, Ronnie, Kelly, and Timmy. They would be in the movies as well. Sometimes these movies involved dead people that their stepdad, Billy, had dug out of the grave across the road from their house. I don't even want to know what that video looked like. It is so disturbing to even picture that. The dead being dug up and using in a movie with these little children. All horrifying for these children. The children described monster games played in the basement with their mother, stepfather, uncles, and other adults. Most of the adults were both from Norma and Billy's family. The adults wore sheets and masks and different costumes. The children were during these rituals, and it was all filmed. During some of the assaults, Kelly was bound and gagged and forced to watch Elliot and the other adults do things with her younger brothers. Francis and Dan told the social workers, and they decided it was best to get the authorities involved. From the first time the children were interviewed, the authorities knew this abuse involved a huge ring of people. It became clear the abusive history went back several generations, possibly at least 5 generations. The police believed that the adults had rented horror movies and would reenact the scenes. Even in the times of the satanic panic, the police didn't want to believe in ritual abuse. So they decided, I think they're reenacting real movies. That's what they decided. While they were being interviewed, the police used cameras, which upset the children at first until it explained to them that these cameras were not going to be used for bad. They were just going to be used in order to, hear their stories. Kelly drew one of the monsters in the basement. She drew a head in a long robe and a mask. She told them that the monsters drank red juice, which authorities assumed was blood. The children were told by Billy that the blood had come from dogs he had killed, but who knows? The children were tied up with ropes in the basement and also in a place that they referred to as a dungeon or hole in the floor of this farmhouse. Kelly said the door to the dungeon hole was occasionally opened and food was thrown down for them to eat, and the times they were forced to stay inside this dungeon for extended periods of time. Also, when they were locked in the basement, sometimes there was cracks in the floor from up above, and they would poke scraps of food down in those cracks for the children to eat. So the children were basically starved a lot of times. They didn't have enough to eat. They were also threatened with knives if they fought being. Ronnie had a scar of a cross on his cheek, and Kelly had scars on her throat that their foster mom had found one day. And they told her that they were cut with knives when they refused to give to these men, monsters. The children said they were forced to eat and drink the monsters' excrement and urine. They were made to eat a dead cat raw that Billy had killed at the cemetery. He killed it. He brought it back to the basement. They filmed all of them sitting around and eating this dead cat, according to the children. One day when the children's foster family were out with the children, they heard a train. This is disturbing. Francis asked the children if they knew what a train was, and Ronnie responded through tears that it was a game. Although Francis was afraid to ask, she did anyway. How did this game go? Ronnie said we all formed a long train, and afterwards his bottom would hurt. Kelly said she remembered other games with in which Billy would put the end of the gun in her mouth or her privates and then pull the trigger. He never had did it, but Kelly didn't know, and she was scared. She thought she was going to die. Ronnie eventually began to talk about his brother Joshua to the authorities. Kelly would later tell the same story about the death of their little baby brother. Kelly said one day she was outside with Norma, Billy, and baby Joshua. Billy was holding a gun, and Norma put the baby on the ground, half on the grass and half on the sidewalk. Billy pointed the gun at him and fired. Kelly said the noise was very loud and there was fire coming from the gun. Billy then picked up Joshua, threw him over his shoulder, carried him across the road, and threw him over the fence onto the grass. Then Billy jumped over the fence, picked Joshua up again, and put him in a hole near the cemetery. Norma told Kelly to go and get the other kids in the house and to come across the road. Kelly did as she was told because she was too scared not to. She carried her cousin Susie, who was very little. Norma told Ronnie to get in the hole with his dead brother. Ronnie wouldn't do it, so Norma pushed him in. Ronnie got out again. Then Norma grabbed Susie, the little cousin, and put her in the hole. Billy put dirt over both of them. Susie started screaming, and Billy told her to shut up. Kelly grabbed cousin Susie and pulled her out and wouldn't let go of her. She probably saved Susie's life. Billy put plastic over the top of the hole and then dirt and grass. Now the part Ronnie remembered was being shoved in the hole with his dead brother. How traumatizing is that? I think you would definitely remember that. Now, not only were authorities investigating child abuse, but also the death of a child who had no birth certificate. It was time to start interviewing adults. The new investigation was named Project Jericho after the baby who had died. The name is from the biblical story about Joshua, who led the Battle of Jericho, and the walls came tumbling down. Billy Elliot admitted to enjoying digging up the dead during his interview and popping their skulls off because he liked the noise it made. Billy admitted that his own mother would sexually abuse him as a child, said his father was cruel to animals and had animal abuse charges in the past. He would kill and abuse animals. And actually, when they dug up around the farmhouse, I guess the new owners that bought the farmhouse did some kind of renovation and started digging up. They actually found bones of animals all around the land of that farmhouse. That is so spooky that not only you got a cemetery across, and you got all these dead animals. However, Billy denied that he sexually abused the children or murdered Joshua. One suspect admitted seeing baby Joshua after he was buried. In that case, if he saw him after he was buried, he had been dug up. And you know that Billy liked to dig up bodies, so he probably dug him up so he could do something with that body. And that's how this other man saw baby Joshua. When Norma was interviewed, she told authorities that she had watched Billy and her two brother-in-laws dress up in a sheet with holes cut out of the eyes and mouth and abuse her children. Norma also told the police that Billy had shot baby Joshua. Said the baby was wrapped in a blanket and buried in a hole in the graveyard across the street from where they lived. Billy was charged with murder, and the search for the body began. Authorities set up a huge tent over the graveyard across the street from the farmhouse. Authorities remained at the cemetery around the clock for weeks and attracted many onlookers who drove by and caused traffic jams on the otherwise isolated road. The murder and the search for the baby's body was front page news in every newspaper. Authorities never could find the baby's body, and a week later, Norma said she changed her mind. Said the baby's never existed, and so nothing happened with the baby. So Billy's murder charge were dropped. The inside of the farmhouse was also searched, and the authorities found the hole that the children had called the dungeon. There was a trap door in the basement, and when it was opened, underneath was a 6-foot deep hole filled with food wrappings and feces, showing the children had been down there. Neighbors of the ELLIOT family farmhouse told police about a man that hung around a lot. He said he is mentally challenged, and his name was CECIL Miller. CECIL was a local man who belonged to a family of inbreds in the community. Within a few minutes, the authorities realized they had stumbled on a major abuser. Miller confessed he had molested 17 children. The youngest victim he abused was a 1-year-old little girl. He also admitted to abusing Timmy when he was just 2 years old. That's when it began. He began abusing Timmy when he went upstairs at the farmhouse one day to get cigarette paper from Billy and encountered Billy raping Timmy in the bedroom. Timmy's diaper was pulled off and laying on the floor. CECIL said he then took a turn raping this little boy, and then him and Billy performed acts on each other. Billy, who had been denying he had sexually abused the children, was now betrayed by this friend. The list of abusers and victims continued to grow. By 1994, the total number of child victims has skyrocketed to 162, with the number of perpetrators being 119. Of these offenders, 97 were male and 22 were female. Most of the offenders were relatives or friends of Billy's and Norman's. Most of the abusers were poor and came from disadvantaged backgrounds. Some were mentally slow. Many had been abused themselves as children. Investigators dug up crimes that had occurred decades before. Many of the victims had mentioned the abuse to social workers or police before, but no charges have been laid. Uncle LORNE Francois was one of the names the children had mentioned when they spoke about monsters, movies, and rituals in the basement. He was accused of abusing Kelly, Ronnie, and Timmy, as well as his own children, Susie and Tammy. Boy, does he look like a pedo. Most people in the community already knew the kind of man that LORNE was, and his nickname was known as Horny LORNE. Most parents feared and despised the predator. Children had been told to stay away from him. They knew he was a nasty dude. Several adults talked about being molested by him when they were children, and yet he was not caught and convicted for his crimes until now, until Kelly and her siblings spoke up. The family doctor, John Finley, was never convicted of any crimes, or at least I couldn't find any information about it if he was. It just seems to be awful fishy that the family only chose to use his services, to me. Investigation by police revealed there were probably dozens of videotapes made of the rape of these children by men and women in disguises. They said it looked like ritual satanic abuse, but it is more than likely a staged imitation. They looked for the tapes with search warrants in several places, including the back rooms of CD video outlets, but found nothing. They believe the tapes, orchestrated by local businessmen, were sent overseas. The children's stories were substantiated by many of the people police interviewed. People who saw the movies but didn't participate. People who ratted on other people. People who admitted that they were guilty of participation. LORNE Francois was sent to prison for 6 years. Years later, near the end of his prison term, the Crown made a bid to have him declared a dangerous offender. But LORNE, he fell in the shower in jail and did not recover. Somebody tried to drown him or something. Billy Elliot was sentenced to 7 years in prison, and he was severely beaten in prison, but survived the beating. Their mother, Norma, served 2 years in prison. Norma's father passed away before the trial started. Billy's parents were convicted. His mother got 15 months for aiding and abetting a sexual assault. His father, 2 years for sexual assault. CECIL Miller served 7 years in prison. He was in the same prison as his mentor, Horny LORNE. CECIL and LORNE claimed to be a married couple while in prison. Of the 65 cases that went to trial, the investigation saw a conviction rate of 91%. About 50 child victims were placed in foster homes and many were adopted. Adopting Kelly, Ronnie, and Timmy were hard on Francis and Dan's marriage, and a few years after the trial, they were divorced, although they continued to be friends and co-parent their bio and adopted children. Frances Hilly wrote a book, The Lady That Had Adopted These Children. This is where I obtained a lot of my information on this video. If you want to read it, it can be found on Kindle. Kelly was married in a fairy tale wedding, but the marriage didn't last. Kelly continues to meet and eat lunch with her foster mom, Frances, when they can get together. Ronnie found love and had a daughter. Timmy lives in a supervised living facility as he was never mentally capable of living alone. He does have a girlfriend and seems very happy. Baby Joshua's body was never found and there was never any charges for his murder because it can never be proven. Rest in peace, baby Joshua. The children described costumes, monsters, rituals, unbelievable stuff. And even adults acting out scenes like characters from movies. At the time in the late 1980s and early 1990s was the height of what became known as the Satanic Panic. Because of that, police were extremely cautious about believing claims of ritual abuse. Recently, public attention has once again turned towards powerful abuse networks because of developments surrounding Jeffrey Epstein and the release of additional documents connected to his case. When people hear about these allegations, many imagine secretive elites, private islands, and powerful men protecting each other. But the Prescott case reminds us of something uncomfortable. Ritual abuse networks don't only exist among the rich and powerful. Sometimes they exist in forgotten places, in poor communities, inside families, hidden behind closed doors. For decades, the children in that farmhouse had no voice until Kelly, Ronnie, and Timmy finally told their story. And once they did, the walls came down, just like the biblical story of Jericho. So if stories like this matter to you, the ones that are rarely told and sometimes uncomfortable to hear, make sure you subscribe so you can find me again in this big YouTube world. Because here at The Murder She Said, we talk about the cases people would rather forget. And sometimes the darkest stories are the ones that most need to be told. Just waiting outside. How long has he been sitting here? Have y'all seen him sitting there the whole time during this video? Why didn't you come in, Booba? You just had to push the doors. Little mess. I'll show you some flowers I put up, but squirrels seem to be picking at them and pulling them off, but I'll show you. I put them up on my arch. I built this arch out of driftwood. My ducks are sitting right here. What do you... I said sit, so you sit. They think I made this chair for them, I think. Why are y'all all in here on my porch and pooping on my porch? Look at you, little Mitsubishi. You're sitting on the top. Her name's Mitsubishi because she's my little troublemaker chicken. Yeah, not a nice name. Why are y'all sitting on my chair? Again, pooping everywhere. I know. Tell me about it. It's not even raining right now. Goodness. I was going to film y'all eating or something, and here you gathered up on my chair. Oh, you going to be that way again, are you? Yeah, you're going to be that way. Mm-hmm. Yeah, attitude. Attitude all over you. This is what they're supposed to be doing, not on my porch. Out here digging in the woods. They've been digging worms up since it rained. Yeah. There's Max. Sasa's over here somewhere. Where you at, Sasa? Oh, you're right there. Well, my ducks think I have food, I guess. Y'all think I have food, and I don't. I'm sorry. Hi, tell them next time to join us again, right at The Murder She Said. Tell them, buddy, tell them. Hey, Kevin, let's say you were hunting. You were in a tree stand, and all of a sudden, a naked lady walks up. What would you say to her?
Nice camouflage.
No, wrong.
Wrong answer.
Wrong answer. What would you do?
What would I do? I wouldn't say nothing. I'd let her walk on by.
You just pretend like you didn't see her?
Didn't see her because she's probably crazier than crap. Being in the woods butt naked.
That's probably true. That's absolutely true.
Get back when I pull up all black, blood drip for that